welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am here with the author of a book called The Ghost Women, which is intriguing and beautifully written, and I think it's going to capture the imagination in so many ways of readers. But first, I would like you to, or rather, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and then tell us about the Ghost Women and how you came to tell this story.
Okay, my name is Jennifer Murphy, and gosh, who am I? I actually, in my earlier life, I have an MFA in painting and an MFA in fiction. And I bring up the painting one because for years I did large scale infrastructure projects. I would ran these programs across the country, and my first big one was the Denver airport, and then all the way I was doing them all over the place. I mean, I actually did them here. I live right now in Alexandria, and I did one for Dulles and Reagan. I've done one for California. I've different places. So while I was doing that, I was doing a whole lot of writing, as you can imagine. And writing, in all honesty, was my first love always, but never something I felt confident enough, kind of indulging myself in. And then I just went back and got my master's in writing and loved it so much, and decided to just try to get a book published. And I lucked out, and I did. I wrote it in like 9 months, and it got picked up in 2014 as I was graduating. And so I feel like I'm living my dream. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, and like I said, you write beautifully, and this book is so intriguing. So, The Ghost Women, it's got like a lot of layers to it. There's sort of a historical layer about, women in the past being persecuted, or considered witches. And then the modern plot is actually in the 70s. So there's lore from the background, but it affects the 70s, and it's a case where some, murders are being investigated, but all of the victims are being staged to emulate different tarot cards. And it brings our main detective into this world of St. Luke's, which is this school where all these murders are happening, and these young women who these murders seem to be happening around. So I'm curious, first of all, tarot has been around for a very, very long time, and there's a lot of conceptions and misconceptions about where it came from and how it's changed. How did tarot become sort of like the lightning rod for you to tell this story, or the lightning rod for the murders, and how it was going to structure this book?
Well, it kind of, I've always loved tarot cards ever since I was little. I tell a story, and this is as true as my memory can bring it back. But I had a babysitter when I was around 9 years old, I believe, that came to our house. Now, why this is kind of important is I went to God school. That's what my neighborhood always said. I went to parochial school, but they called it God school, the kids in my neighborhood. And had this babysitter that came over one day with tarot cards and told me, of course, she was like so exotic about it. Like, she lit candles and she did all this stuff. And she said, "Do not tell your parents or you'll never have me as a babysitter again." And that stuck with me. I don't remember a whole lot from my youth, but I remember that. And I remember some other basic things, but I specifically remember being just mesmerized by this whole experience with the lit candles and the dimming of the lights and these beautiful cards, just gorgeous. And I always like to draw and I like to read. And, so the whole thing was just fascinating to me. So that's kind of where it started. But I forgot about it for years until I went to college, undergraduate school, and I was getting my degree in art. And I was with my roommate at the time in the dorm room, and we were at this place that served Russian tea. I don't know, it was like a Russian tea house. And there was a woman in the corner reading cards, and she was wearing all this really flowy stuff. And I just had this recollection. This is, what is this? So I went and talked to her, and I asked her about the cards, and I explained my babysitter's cards, and she had never seen them because they were like the ones that are in the book. They were obviously facsimiles, not real. But then I sort of went from there. And years later, I was in Italy, in Florence, and was kind of walking down whatever the San Lorenzo, whatever it is, that outdoor market. And I ran across this booth of people that had all these cards. And I explained those again. I tried to describe the cards of my babysitters to her, and she was the first time. It was like this weird sort of, she goes, well, that sounds like these Visconti Sforza cards from, the 15th century. And she showed me, and she said, these are facsimiles, so they're different. At the time, there was only, and I don't think people really knew this, there was one deck at a time back then because they were designed by court artists for the during the Renaissance. And then she told me something that really started this whole thing for the book. She said, but they weren't used to read your fortune. They were used to play a game. And that's where it started to me. And I thought, okay, and right away I started thinking. I didn't start writing for maybe 9 months or so after that because I was trying to absorb and do research. And the whole idea of a game that somehow over the centuries turned into fortune telling, but now even, which is even so much different, now people are using it as sort of a way to solve problems. And you think about like even in therapy, and that is even amazing. And tarot cards now, and I learned all of this as I did all this research, are like have doubled in sales over the last probably 10 years due to like kind of Gen Z and the millennials, I should say, coming back to the youth. So that's what got me thinking, I need to, write this book that follows this history. And the only way in my mind I could do that was to figure out how I was going to write in the 15th century and how I was going to write, kind of in the 20th century. And that's where it began. That's where it started. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's a quick overview.
Well, it does. And I found it interesting that you chose, again, like I said, like the modern setting to be in the 70s, which was a big revival of certain occultism or interest in it. Yeah, there's always an ebb and flow, and it changes, each time. I was like in elementary school in the 80s and, like the grade school, the 80s, early 90s. That was definitely peak satanic panic, and like it was like everywhere, stay away from tarot cards. It's like this big ebb and flow that always seems to happen. I really liked the 70s plot, with these young women like Pearl and Esme, who Lola has to question because they find the boy who's hanging, and he's staged to look like the hanging man,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yes. I'm like, is it the hung man? No, the hanging man. And he's got a history with one of them. And this is kind of sort of the inception point of this. But I got these like, it was these vibes. Like it almost felt a like a Wicker Man feel to it. However, without the man part, it was really just a story told with women. So I thought that it was fascinating. For you, why did you specifically choose the 70s as the modern period of time you wanted the murders to take place in?
It started for me with Roe v. Wade. It started with Roe v. Wade was going to be passed, I guess, in 73. Was it January or something of 73? And I thought I was trying to find a period of time that I'm a little older than you, but the 70s, I didn't really grow up during the 70s. So but I wanted to find a period of time where women were subjugated, that it would be a similar type. And I mean, it's not similar, but it is. It's the closest, I think, in modern day times to what was happening with women way back in the 15th century. And I just, I did so much research on the 70s and how, women were burning their bras. They were like, it was this wonderful sort of time where women were really coming together against authority and against, this subjugation. And it's similar to what was happening back then, only it was much more medieval. And all these women, and I did a lot of research on that too. It's amazing how many places at that time where these witch burnings were happening, or not just burnings, but, stonings and it sort of was a Catholic Church thing. And I said earlier that I went to parochial school. So that was even more intriguing to me because it was just fascinating. And I guess we've just also in this period of time now gone through this a whole nother sort of resurgence of that again. And it's very scary. I'll just say it. And so I knew I had to write a book that would be kind of scary, kind of horror-like, but not, but yet have this spiritual sort of overtone. And the ghosts and the women that they die and then they go to the tree um, and the woods. And I lived in Charleston for quite a while, and it's one of my favorite places ever. And it just is full of ghost stories and sort of spiritual areas and trees and woods and water, the whole thing. And I just thought it's got to be set there so that I could bring in the folklore and sort of the sort of witchery that goes on down there. It's a different thing, but I wanted to bring together all these things. So it was a large charge. I mean, I'll just say it that way. I was like, how am I going to make this work? And that's why I had to think for so long. I had to, decide how I was going to begin it. And I just decided I was going to start with a woman that was being, who's only 14, I think, in the book. And at that time, that was kind of, that happened a lot when they were very young. And then I wanted to also, kind of bring that forward and show the reader as much as I could what it was like to her to, what it was going to feel like to be burned at the stake, how she was going to fly into the tree, her fears and all that. And then I could bring it years later to the present day. I mean, well, to the 1970s, and one of her, kind of, this is a relative that's, centuries, and who literally goes to this school on purpose. And having gone to an art school, so much of unbelievably what happened in this book, I could say happened to me. So there was parts of me inside of that book. And that was because, when I went to art school, it still was a very sort of, and even today, I still think it is, male artists, male writers still, seem to have an edge when it comes to any sort of creative endeavor. And so I wanted to bring that in. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I brought it together, that I was going to have the two different centuries and I was going to bring them together by having one of the four witches, the four girls, the coven, be a descendant of this witch in the past. And that's how it all starts. And we follow their story.
So I mean, it's their story. It's also Lola's story.
Yeah.
But the group, the matriarchy or the coven, however, I believe they describe it as a matriarchy. And there's all of these legends of, like how things were then and how things are now. How did you sort of build the structure of that, of, how because it wasn't even just that they were a coven or a group of, 1970s girls who were practicing witchcraft. They were friends, and teenage girls as friends, things get a little messy. So, how did you sort of build the structure of their small community and then also their relationship?
I wanted them to be as real as possible. And I just tried to look back at what it was like when I was that age and all the times that, boy crazy but boys were not all nice. And And I just think that, bringing in, I decided that each one of them was going to have a very distinct personality and background that would feed into this kind of they love each other, they hate each other sort of mentality. They're jealous, they're not, and and then I loved them all, but it's funny. I think I was really, I don't want to say too much because I loved Esme. And I really needed her. I thought she was kind of a grounding tool of all, but she's very, raised very properly. And, she doesn't like to hurt people's feelings and all that. So that was that personality type. And then there was, then there was the descendant of of, of the witches. And she was just very, just kind of smart and had her garden. And so they each had all these personalities that grew together. And then, of course, there was Pearl, who was in love with the first boy that gets killed. And then, then there's Hazel, who I think they're stereotypes if you really look at them. And so I needed those stereotypes, I think, to make this full kind of picture of what they were going to go through. And that we would, as the reader, come in and start thinking, okay, who's the bad guy here? Who's the bad girl here? What's going on? And it was not easy, to pull that together. And, as this is my third novel, and I have the best editor in the entire world. And she, helped me as I was going through the basic structure, the nuts and bolts of the story, like how was I going to, keep going back and forth in time, but not too much back and forth. And then one of the things that came later that I did not have in the novel that she recommended, or one of the early readers did, was, well, I don't feel always like I'm in the 70s. So I brought in 70s music, and I brought in 70s, situations that had occurred that the girls were a part of. And I mean, I think that I will say it was totally fun to write. It was, after I finally figured out how I was going to get to where I was going to get, it wrote itself pretty quickly. So the hardest part was setting up the structure, setting up the past and the present that was in the past, and getting to know these girls. That was really important to me because I had to get to know who they were. And so then it was just, the story, and that comes in later, and you probably asked about that too. But then there's the story of what happened in the past with actually an artist from the 15th century who gets sent away because his teacher steals his art. He designs the deck of tarot cards, and the teacher steals it. And so that's how I got him there into the story. And then the Black Book, that everybody starts figuring out what's going on here. So
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of pieces and they all worked really nicely together on a completely separate note, but not really. Do you have any favorite tarot cards? Like, are there any cards that really just sort of draw you in, and why?
well, I did pick up one of these old decks, and I was totally amazed. I had been collecting tarot cards for years because I thought they were so pretty. They were just beautiful, and the exotic, all those kind of words. And I found this old deck of cards in Italy and bought it. It was way too much money. It was like, my husband was not happy when he saw that I spent this money, but I had to have them because to me they were the total kind of floor of the novel. And so those are my favorite tarot cards now. However, but if I were like what I used to have, my favorite were the Rider-Waite's. I loved them. The initial Rider-Waite cards were, I mean, they're beautiful in themselves. And over the years, they have changed too. They've gone from kind of grainy looking to something very bright and colorful. And in every single one of them, they kind of have the same, at least in the major arcana, they have the same sort of pictures on the cards, but some of them are totally different. Like, and when I think of the death card, for instance, like on some of the decks, you'll see a death is riding a horse. On others, you'll see death is standing in it, or death is a skeleton. And that fascinated me too. This whole idea of why did these artists design these decks so differently? And that had a lot to do with history, basically, and how they went from being, this game that used to be played with them, which was a lot like bridge, and then over time kind of became something else. So, I mean, I shouldn't be asking you questions, but do you
Oh,
have
you could ask me questions. I kind of like the wheel.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that that's a really interesting one. Myself,
Like the
personally.
Wheel of Fortune,
Yes, the Wheel of Fortune. Yes, I like that one a lot, personally. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the book. Each section is separated by a different card, which reflects the murder that takes place. And I thought that that was extremely interesting and well done as well. I could tell you really loved writing this book. Like reading the book, I could tell this was something you really enjoyed.
yeah, it was. And, it's hard as a writer because I spend, a few years writing a book and, going through all the process of it and, getting, my editor, I love her again. I'm gonna say it again. I love her, but, she took out stuff too. So you have to, it's that sort of balance of, oh, I really loved that part, but she's always right. But it's been really hard. I mean, it hasn't come out yet, but, I have a galley, which was so fun to get because then I could see, like you're talking about, all those different, how they set up the chapters and had the drawings of the tree and that was really cool. But it was hard to let it go. I mean, I'll be honest with you. And then it's like the other thing is, and this happens always, all three books that I've written, as I get to the further and further into it, and I don't know if people know that there's like three main edits with your editor, then you go into kind of smaller edits with people that are looking for things that don't make sense or that you said something different one time than you said before. And then it goes into, and there's about three of those different people. And then you go into line edits and there's even more people. So, that's anywhere from 6 to 9 edits you go through in a book. And so, um, just as the fun thing about it is that it's coming together, but that's also the unfun thing about it, because the closer you get to pulling it together, the more the more I wanted to write. It was like, I didn't get to cover everything I wanted to cover, but, we'll see. Maybe I'll get to write another book about tarot at some point.
Well, thank you so much. The Ghost Women was lovely. I think it's definitely got that folk horror feeling to it. So if that's your thing, you'll like it. But I also think it's going to have appeal outside of just general horror readers as well. I think there's a lot of history, both modern and also past, and just enough mystery as well, that I think it's going to draw a lot of people in. So thank you so much for chatting with us about it.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Thanks. And I'm
This
very,
was-
very happy that you liked it.
I did. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was,
Jennifer Murphy.
and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.